Mr. Chair, we're ready to commence the meeting.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's now 10:30 a.m. and time to begin the annual and special meeting of shareholders of Brookfield Corporation. My name is Frank McKenna, and as chair of the board, it's my pleasure to chair today's meeting. On behalf of the board and management, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone joining us through our live webcast. Similar to our meeting last year, voting during the meeting will take place on our webcast platform. I will now explain this process. We will conduct the votes on the matter before us by a poll. The poll will be open for all resolutions at the same time and throughout the formal portion of the meeting. This will allow you to choose to vote on each resolution immediately or wait until the conclusion of discussion on each resolution prior to casting your vote. For each resolution, if you voted in advance of the meeting and do not wish to revoke your previously submitted proxies, then no action is required. We will welcome questions from our shareholders. As described in our management information circular for this meeting, participants can submit questions by clicking on the messaging icon on the left side of the webcast and typing a question. Please indicate whether your question is of a general nature or if it relates to a motion being considered as part of the meeting's formal business. Questions relating to a particular motion will be answered at the appropriate time in the meeting. Note that we recommend that you submit questions relating to motions being tabled as soon as possible because there is a 30-second delay in the webcast. Questions of a general nature will be answered during a Q&A period following the formal business of the meeting. Please click the submit button once you have finished typing your question. Our corporate secretary, who is serving as moderator of this meeting, will read out the question, and either a member of management or I will respond. If we receive similar questions, we will read one of them and note it is to be one of a number of similar questions. Now, if you connected to this meeting as a guest, you will not be able to submit a question. Moving on, we wish to thank you for your participation in today's meeting. I now call the meeting to order and would ask that our transfer agent by its representatives, Alan Kim and Karish Mali, are to act as scrutineers. I will also act our corporate secretary, Swati Mandava, to act as secretary of today's meeting. In the unlikely event of technology issues disconnecting my audio, I have designated Swati to step in as chair of the meeting. It's now my pleasure to introduce the members of management with us today. Nicholas Goodman, our President and Chief Financial Officer. Justin Beaver, our Chief Operating Officer. Following the conclusion of the formal part of the meeting, there will be a presentation from management. As outlined in our management information circular, there are 9 items of business to be considered today. First, to receive the consolidated financial statements of the corporation for the fiscal year ended December 31st, 2025, including the external auditor's report. Secondly, to elect directors who will serve until the next annual general meeting of shareholders. Third, to appoint the external auditor and authorize the director to set its remuneration. Fourth, to consider an advisory resolution on the corporation's approach to executive comp. Fifth, to consider a special resolution approving the transaction set out in the management information circular designed to simplify our corporate structure, or the transaction resolution, as it will be referred to in this meeting. Sixth, if the transaction resolution is passed, only if it's to consider an ordinary resolution approving a stock option plan for Brookfield Corporation Limited. Brookfield Corporation Limited will be referred to as New BN at this meeting, and the resolution will be referred to as the New BN Share Option Plan Resolution in this meeting. Seventh, if the transaction resolution is passed, to consider an ordinary resolution approving an escrowed stock plan for New BN, or the New BN Escrowed Stock Plan Resolution, as it will be referred to in this meeting. Eighth, if the transaction resolution is passed, to consider an ordinary resolution approving an escrowed stock plan for Brookfield Canada Corporation, an affiliate of New BN. The affiliate of New BN will be referred to as New BNC in this meeting, and the resolution will be referred to as the New BNC Escrowed Stock Plan Resolution in this meeting. And ninth, if the transaction resolution is passed, to consider an ordinary resolution approving a stock option plan for the New BNC or the New BNC Share Plan Resolution, as it will be referred to in this meeting. Now, the full text of each of the transaction-related resolutions to be voted on at the meeting is set out in the transaction supplement to the Management Information Circular. The transaction-related resolutions are conditions precedent to completion of the transaction, and we will not, I repeat, not proceed with the transaction unless shareholders have approved the transaction-related resolutions to be voted on at the meeting. As mentioned, in connection with the business to be dealt with today, all voting will be conducted by online ballot through the live audio webcast platform. Voting is now open on all resolutions. In order to expedite the formal part of today's meeting, I've asked certain shareholders to move and second various resolutions. Although this procedure will assist in the handling of the formal matters, it is not intended to discourage anyone from submitting questions in reference to any resolution after it has been proposed and seconded. Now, I'm advised that the notion calling this meeting and the Management Information Circular were disseminated to voting shareholders in accordance with all applicable laws. I've asked the Corporate Secretary to keep a copy of the notice and proof of mailing with the minutes of this meeting, and the minutes of last year's meeting of shareholders held on June 6, 2025 are also available upon request should any shareholders wish to review them. Based upon the scrutineer's preliminary report on attendance, the Secretary has confirmed there is a quorum. I therefore declare the meeting is properly constituted for the transaction of the business for which it has been called. Turning to the first item of formal business, I will now table the Corporation's 2025 Annual Report to shareholders, which includes the Corporation's consolidated financial statements for the fiscal year ended December 31st, 2025, together with the External Auditor's Report. Our annual report has been mailed to shareholders who requested it and is available in the meeting materials for this live webcast as well as on our website.
Mr. Chair, we have not received any questions or comments submitted in connection with the financial statements.
The second item of business at our meeting today is to elect directors who will serve until our next annual meeting of shareholders. To assist you in identifying our directors, their photos will be shown on the slides of the webcast platform as I read their names. The 8 proposed nominees for election by holders of the Corporation's Class A Limited Voting Shares are Elise Allen, Ang Long Seng, Janice Fukakusa, Maureen Kempster Darks, myself, Uta Molian, Satish Ray, and Diana Taylor. The 8 nominees for election by holders of the Corporation's Class B Limited Voting Shares are Howard Marks, Rafael Miranda, Lord Gus O'Donnell, Jeffrey Blidner, Jack Cockwell, Bruce Flatt, Brian Lawson, and Samuel Pollack. 15 of the 16 director nominees were elected at our last annual general meeting in June 2025 and are standing for re-election today. Mr. Ang Seng is a current director of the Corporation and was appointed by the board on Feb 11, 2026 and is standing for re-election. Now, information on all 16 director nominees is set out in our Management Information Circular, which was posted on our website for shareholder review and is available from the company upon request.
Mr. Chair, we have not received any questions or comments with respect to the nomination of directors.
The meeting is now open to receive nominations for the election of the proposed directors. We invite shareholders and proxy holders to submit their vote if they have not already done so.
Mr. Chair, I nominate for election as directors the 8 nominees for the Class A Limited Voting Shareholders and the 8 nominees for the Class B Limited Voting Shareholders named in the Management Information Circular dated June 5th, 2026.
Thank you, Thomas.
Mr. Chair, I second the motion.
Thank you, Oscar. Are there any further nominations? If not, I declare the nominations closed. As there are 16 directors to be elected, the same number of nominees, I now declare that those nominated have been duly elected as directors of the Corporation. The third item of business today is the appointment of the Corporation's External Auditor and authorizing the directors to set its remuneration. As stated in our Management Information Circular, the Audit Committee of our Board of Directors has recommended shareholders that Deloitte LLP be reappointed as the corporation's external auditor.
Mr. Chair, I move that Deloitte LLP be appointed as the external auditor of the corporation until the next annual meeting, and that the directors be authorized to set its remuneration.
Thank you, Thomas.
Mr. Chair, I second the motion.
Thank you, Oscar. The resolution has been moved and seconded. The motion is now before the committee for discussion.
Mr. Chair, we have not received any questions or comments submitted in connection with the appointment of the auditors.
Now, adoption of this motion requires the favorable vote of a majority of the votes cast at the meeting by the holders of each of the Class A limited voting shares and the Class B limited voting shares, voting as separate classes. Management has received proxies representing approximately 76% of the corporation's Class A limited voting shares and 100% of the Class B limited voting shares. These proxies direct me to vote over 91% of the Class A limited voting shares and all of the Class B limited voting shares in favor of the resolution. I will now call for shareholders and proxy holders to submit their vote if they have not already done so. The fourth item of business today is the approval of the advisory resolution on the corporation's approach to executive compensation described in our management information circular. The corporation has put forth an advisory resolution at this meeting as part of its ongoing efforts to both meet its corporate governance objectives and ensure a high level of shareholder engagement. Because this is an advisory vote, the results will not be binding upon the board. However, the board and the Management Resources and Compensation Committee will take into account the results of the vote as appropriate when considering future compensation policies and decisions. The board welcomes comments and questions on the corporation's executive compensation practices.
Mr. Chair, I move that the advisory resolution accept the approach to executive compensation described in the Management Information Circular dated June 5th, 2026 be approved.
Thank you, Thomas.
Mr. Chair, I second the motion.
And thank you, Oscar. The resolution has been moved and seconded, and the motion is now before the meeting for discussion.
Mr. Chair, we have not received any questions or comments in connection with the corporation's approach to executive compensation.
Adoption of this motion requires the favorable vote of a majority of the Class A limited voting shares. Management has received proxies representing approximately 76% of the corporation's Class A limited voting shares. These proxies direct me to vote over 95% of the Class A limited voting shares in favor of the resolution. I will now call for shareholders and proxy holders to submit their vote if they have not already done so. The fifth item of business today is the approval of the transaction resolution as described in the Management Information Circular. This vote is being held pursuant to an order of the Ontario Superior Court of Justice. A copy of the order can be found in Appendix J to the transaction supplement included in the Management Information Circular dated June 5th, 2026, and is also available for inspection if requested. As described in the Management Information Circular, the transaction would result in the combination of the businesses of the corporation and Brookfield Wealth Solutions Limited under a single publicly traded company, New BN. The combination of the businesses of the corporation and Brookfield Wealth Solutions is designed to further simplify our corporate structure, create a more capital-efficient platform to support Brookfield's long-term growth, and open a path to broader global index inclusion. We are excited about this transaction as it will mark the next evolution of Brookfield as a globally diversified and fully integrated insurance and investment organization, setting us up well for our next phase of growth. If the transaction resolution is approved by shareholders, the final hearing of the court to approve the transaction is scheduled to take place on July 21st, 2026 at 10 a.m., and the transaction is expected to close in late Q4 2026, subject to customary closing conditions, including the approval by the shareholders of Brookfield Wealth Solutions and receipt of all other legal and regulatory approvals. As stated in the Management Information Circular, the Board of Directors has recommended that shareholders vote in favor of the transaction resolution. The Board welcomes comments and questions on the transaction resolution.
Mr. Chair, I move that the transaction resolution as set forth in Appendix B to the transaction supplement of the Management Information Circular dated June 5th, 2026 be approved.
Thank you, Thomas.
Mr. Chair, I second the motion.
And thank you, Oscar. The resolution has been moved and seconded. The motion is now before the meeting for discussion.
Mr. Chair, we've not received any questions or comments in connection with the transaction resolution.
Adoption of this motion requires the favorable vote of at least 66 2/3 of the votes cast in person or by proxy by the holders of the Class A limited voting shares at the meeting, and 66 2/3 of the votes cast in person or by proxy by the holders of the Class B limited voting shares at this meeting. Management has received proxies representing approximately 76% of the corporation's Class A limited voting shares and 100% of the Class B limited voting shares. These proxies direct me to vote over 79% of the Class A limited voting shares and all of the Class B limited voting shares in favor of the resolution. I will now call for shareholders and proxy holders to submit their vote if they have not already done so. The sixth item of business today is the approval of the new BN share option plan resolution. As stated in the Management Information Circular, the Board of Directors recommended that shareholders vote in favor of the new BN share option plan resolution. The Board welcomes comments and questions on the new BN share option plan resolution.
Mr. Chair, I move that the new BN share option plan resolution set forth in Appendix D to the transaction supplement of the Management Information Circular dated June 5th, 2026 be approved.
Thank you, Thomas.
Mr. Chair, I second the motion.
Thank you, Oscar. The resolution has been moved and seconded. The motion is now before the meeting for discussion.
Mr. Chair, we have not received any questions or comments in connection with the stock option plan of New BN.
Adoption of this motion requires the approval of a majority calculated on a combined basis of the votes cast in person or by proxy by 1, the holders of the corporation's Class A limited voting shares at this meeting, and the holders of Brookfield Wealth Solutions Class A limited voting shares at Brookfield Wealth Solutions shareholder meeting being held later today, or the BWS meeting as it will be referred to in this meeting. And 2, the holders of the corporation's Class B limited voting shares at this meeting and the holders of Brookfield Wealth Solutions Class B limited voting shares at the BWS meeting. Now, management has received proxies representing approximately 76% of the corporation's Class A limited voting shares and 100% of the corporation's Class B limited voting shares. These proxies direct me to vote over 75% of the Class A limited voting shares and 100% of the Class B limited voting shares in favor of the resolution. I will now call for shareholders and proxy holders to submit their vote if they have not already done so. The seventh item of business today is the approval of the new BN escrow stock plan resolution. As stated in the Management Information Circular, the Board of Directors recommended that shareholders vote in favor of the new BN escrow stock plan resolution. The Board welcomes comments and questions on the new BN escrow stock plan resolution.
Mr. Chair, I move that the new BN escrow stock plan resolution set forth in Appendix E to the transaction supplement of the Management Information Circular dated June 5th, 2026 be approved.
Thank you, Thomas.
Mr. Chair, I second the motion.
Thank you, Oscar. The resolution has been moved and seconded. The motion is now before the meeting for discussion.
Mr. Chair, we have not received any questions or comments in connection with the escrow stock plan of New BN.
Adoption of this motion requires the approval of a majority, which will be calculated on a combined basis of the votes cast in person or by proxy by, firstly, the holders of the corporation's Class A limited voting shares at this meeting and the holders of Brookfield Wealth Solutions Class A limited voting shares at the BWS meeting, and secondly, the holders of the corporation's Class B limited voting shares at this meeting and the holders of Brookfield Wealth Solutions Class B limited voting shares at the BWS meeting. Now, management has received proxies representing approximately 76% of the corporation's Class A limited voting shares and 100% of the Class B limited voting shares. These proxies direct me to vote over 71% of the Class A limited voting shares and 100% of the Class B limited voting shares in favor of the resolution. I will now call for shareholders and proxy holders to submit their vote if they have not already done so. The eighth item of business today is the approval of the new BNC Escrowed Stock Plan Resolution. As stated in the Management Information Circular, the Board of Directors has recommended that shareholders vote in favor of the new BNC Escrowed Stock Plan Resolution. The Board welcomes comments and questions on the new BNC Escrowed Stock Plan Resolution.
Mr. Chair, I move that the new BNC Escrowed Stock Plan Resolution set forth in Appendix F to the Transaction Supplement of the Management Information Circular dated June 5th, 2026 be approved.
Thank you, Thomas.
Mr. Chair, I second the motion.
And thank you, Oscar. The resolution has been moved and seconded. The motion is now before the meeting for discussion.
Mr. Chair, we have not received any questions or comments in connection with the escrow stock plan of new BNC.
Adoption of this motion requires the approval of a majority, which is calculated on a combined basis, of the votes cast in person or by proxy by, firstly, the holders of corporations Class A limited voting shares at this meeting and the holders of Brookfield Wealth Solutions Class A limited voting shares at the BWS meeting, and secondly, the holders of the corporation's Class B limited voting shares at this meeting and the holders of Brookfield Wealth Solutions Class B limited voting shares at the BWS meeting. Management has received proxies representing about 76% of the corporation's Class A limited voting shares and 100% of the Class B limited voting shares. These proxies direct me to vote over 94% of the Class A limited voting shares and 100% of the Class B limited voting shares in favor of the resolution. I will now call for shareholders and proxy holders to submit their vote if they have not already done so. The ninth item of business today is the approval of the new BNC Share Option Plan Resolution. As stated in the Management Information Circular, the Board of Directors recommended that shareholders vote in favor of the new BNC Share Option Plan Resolution. The Board welcomes comments and questions on the new BNC Share Option Plan Resolution.
Mr. Chair, I move that the new BNC Share Option Plan Resolution set forth in Appendix G to the Transaction Supplement of the Management Information Circular dated June 5th, 2026 be approved.
Thank you, Thomas.
Mr. Chair, I second the motion.
And thank you, Oscar. The resolution has been moved and seconded. The motion is now before the meeting for discussion.
Mr. Chair, we have not received any questions or comments in connection with the stock option plan of new BNC.
Adoption of this motion requires the approval of a majority calculated on a combined basis of the votes cast in person or by proxy by, firstly, the holders of the corporation's Class A limited voting shares at this meeting and the holders of Brookfield Wealth Solutions Class A limited voting shares at the BWS meeting, and secondly, the holders of the corporation's Class B limited voting shares at this meeting and the holders of Brookfield Wealth Solutions Class B limited voting shares at the BWS meeting. Management has received proxies representing approximately 76% of the corporation's Class A limited voting shares and 100% of the Class B limited voting shares. These proxies direct me to vote over 94% of the Class A limited voting shares and 100% of the Class B limited voting shares in favor of the resolution. I will now call for shareholders and proxy holders to submit their vote if they have not already done so. Voting is now closed on all resolutions. I'm advised that our Corporate Secretary has results of the vote based on the final tabulations of proxy votes received.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am pleased to report, as there are 16 directors to be elected and the same number of nominees, I now declare that those nominated have been duly elected as directors of the corporation. On the appointment of the corporation's external auditor and authorization of directors to set its remuneration, I declare the motion carried. On the approval of the advisory resolution on the corporation's approach to executive compensation, I declare the motion carried. On the approval of the transaction resolution, I declare the motion carried. Regarding the new BN Share Option Plan Resolution, the new BN Escrowed Stock Plan Resolution, the new BNC Escrowed Stock Plan Resolution, and the new BNC Share Option Plan Resolution, formal declaration will be made following the BWS meeting to be held later today. The final voting results will be available after the BWS meeting and will be posted to SEDAR+ at www.sedarplus.ca.
Ladies and gentlemen, that completes the formal business of today's meeting. There being no other business, I declare the meeting terminated. Now that the meeting has concluded, the formal meeting has concluded, Nick Goodman will be leading a presentation on behalf of our management team. At the end of the presentation, we will be available to respond to any questions or comments you may have submitted. Now, please note that in responding to questions and in talking about our new initiatives and our financial and operating performance, we may make forward-looking statements. These statements are subject to known and unknown risks, and future results may differ materially. For further information on known risk factors, you're encouraged to review the business environment and risk section of management's discussion and analysis in our annual report. Finally, we would like to ensure that all shareholders who are interested in asking a question have the opportunity to do so. We will make every effort on our part to address questions during the allotted question and answer period. With that, I invite Nick Goodman to commence management's presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to review our financial performance over the last 12 months and the progress we have made in executing our strategic priorities. I'll then turn to our outlook for the business and the steps we are taking to position Brookfield for continued long-term growth. But first, I will start with an overview of where the business stands today. We have built a permanent capital base which, at $175 billion today, is one of the largest pools of discretionary capital globally. This capital is invested across our three core businesses, which we have methodically scaled over time, being asset management, wealth solutions, and our operating businesses. Our permanent capital base gives us significant flexibility, remains one of our greatest competitive advantages, and is central to how we continue to grow and compound value for shareholders over the long term. Brookfield Corporation captures the full value of the Brookfield franchise, and as we continue to scale our businesses and reinvest capital, the corporation is uniquely positioned to compound value for shareholders. Our asset management business holds a leadership position in the secular trends shaping the global economy. Digitalization, deglobalization, and decarbonization are driving demand for our private fund strategies. Our wealth solutions business has scaled into a global, investment-led insurance platform. We have built leading origination capabilities in North America, recently completed the acquisition of Just Group, giving our business immediate scale in the UK, and have significant runway to scale further as we grow our existing product lines, expand distribution, and enter new markets. Matched with our investing capabilities, this business is well positioned to continue compounding earnings and value for shareholders over the long term. Our operating businesses continue to generate resilient cash flows, supported by contracted and inflation-linked revenues, essential service assets, and strong underlying operations. And carried interest is now reaching an inflection point. As transaction activity continues to accelerate, we expect carried interest to become a much more meaningful contributor to earnings, driving higher cash flows that can be reinvested to further compound value. Underpinning all of this is a conservatively capitalized balance sheet and significant liquidity that gives us the flexibility to invest when opportunities arise and support growth across the franchise. Bringing this all together, the strength of our franchise, the growth embedded across each of our businesses, and our disciplined approach to capital allocation gives us the foundation to continue delivering 15% plus annual returns for our shareholders over the long term. Now let's turn to the past year. We have had a very strong year, with each of our businesses performing well and contributing meaningfully to the overall earnings profile of the franchise. Over this period, we generated $6 billion of distributable earnings, supported by continued growth across our core businesses. Our asset management business benefited from strong fundraising momentum, raising $108 billion of capital across strategies, and increasing fee-bearing capital to $614 billion. Our wealth solutions business continued to scale globally, with insurance assets growing to $180 billion, inclusive of the acquisition of Just Group. We also continued to advance monetizations across the franchise, monetizing over $80 billion of assets and crystallizing significant value for our investors. Our access to capital remained very strong, with $170 billion of financings completed across our businesses. And reflecting our enduring commitment to driving long-term shareholder value, we returned $1.5 billion of capital to shareholders. Now turning to the details driving performance in each of our businesses. Our asset management business delivered strong growth. We raised $108 billion across our flagship funds and complementary strategies, reflecting the strength of our client relationships and their continued demand for our investment strategies. This fundraising drove fee-bearing capital to $614 billion and supported 18% growth in fee-related earnings, which reached $3.1 billion over the last 12 months. On the back of this momentum, we recently launched the next vintages of our flagship infrastructure and private equity strategies. Both are expected to hold first closes later this year, and importantly, we expect each of them to be the largest funds we have ever raised in its respective strategy. Our Wealth Solutions business also continued to scale globally over the past year and delivered strong financial results. Distributable earnings increased 11% to $1.7 billion, supported by strong investment performance and the continued expansion of our insurance asset base. We originated $20 billion of annuity sales and completed the strategic acquisition of Just Group in the UK, which expanded our global presence and increased total insurance assets by $40 billion to $188 billion. We also deployed $14 billion float into Brookfield managed strategies, underscoring our strategy to reposition the incumbent investment portfolio into higher yielding real assets, targeting mid-teen returns on BN's invested capital. Our operating businesses continue to deliver stable and resilient cash flows, demonstrating the quality of the underlying operations. We generated $1.5 billion of distributable earnings, supported by strong operating fundamentals across the portfolio. And a specific call-out in real estate, our high-quality assets continue to perform well, with occupancy rates above 95% across our Supercore and Core Plus portfolios. As highlighted, the strong performance across our businesses has allowed our free cash flow to scale meaningfully over time. Today, distributable earnings are $2.54 per share, compared to $1.29 per share 5 years ago. That represents a 15% compound annual growth rate, meaning our earnings have nearly doubled over that period. Share buybacks remain an important part of our capital allocation framework and are focused on creating meaningful long-term value for shareholders. Over the last year, we returned $1.5 billion of capital to shareholders, including $900 million through opportunistic share repurchases and $600 million through dividends. Underpinning all of this is a balance sheet that we manage conservatively, together with our strong access to capital. As mentioned, over the last year, we maintained strong access to capital markets and completed $170 billion of financings across our businesses, and today we have $188 billion of deployable capital and continue to be rated A- at the corporation. This combination of significant liquidity and scale access to capital gives us the ability to act on attractive opportunities across market cycles and to support the long-term compounding of our capital. Now that we have summarized the strength of our performance over the past year, let's look forward. We are exceptionally well positioned to continue scaling our earnings at more than 20% annually over the next 5 years. And that growth comes from two key areas. The first is participating in the growth delivered by our core businesses. The second is capital allocation. We generate significant free cash flow from our core businesses, and we reinvest that capital across the franchise, planting the seeds for future earnings growth. Over the next 5 years, we expect the earnings generated from capital reinvestment to incrementally add 5% annualized growth for our earnings profile. In total, that translates to 25% compound annual growth in earnings over the next 5 years. Before the effects of capital allocation, the earnings profile of our core businesses underpins annualized DE growth of 20% through 2030. Starting from $2.54 per share today, we expect DE to grow to $5.85 per share by 2030, in line with the plans we laid out at our Investor Day last September. Now let me spend a minute walking you through what drives that growth. In Wealth Solutions, we have grown insurance assets to $180 billion in just a few years, and we see a clear path to nearly doubling that to $350 billion by 2030. That growth will come from scaling our product set, growing our distribution channels, and expanding the geographies where we serve policyholders. At BAM, we expect fee-bearing capital to grow to more than $1 trillion. That growth will come from scaling our flagship strategies, and expanding our complementary strategies to meet the needs of our clients. In real estate, there are two important contributors to our plan. First, our Supercore portfolio comprises high-quality assets in supply-constrained markets that are performing well and achieving strong rent spreads on new leases, which should continue to drive NOI growth. Second, as demand for hard assets continues to gain momentum, we expect transaction activity will surface meaningful capital that can be reinvested. And lastly, carried interest is reaching an inflection point, and the outlook for realizations over the next few years is encouraging. Carried interest represents our share of the value that has been compounding in our funds over many years. And as we monetize assets across our mature funds, that value converts into cash that can be reinvested across the franchise to further drive earnings and value creation. If we are successful in executing our plans, we expect to generate $53 billion of cumulative free cash flow from our existing businesses over the next 5 years. That free cash flow will then be deployed through our disciplined, centralized capital allocation framework. This framework has been methodically developed over many years. At BN, our role is to allocate capital across the business to the areas where we see the most attractive long-term risk-adjusted returns. And because we sit at the center of the Brookfield franchise, we have a broad perspective on the relative opportunities and capital needs across each of our businesses. That allows us to invest with discipline and with purpose. It is this centralized approach to capital allocation and the flexibility it provides that we believe is one of our greatest differentiators and strengths. As free cash flow is generated by each of our core businesses or repatriated to the corporation, we centralize our capital allocation approach with a consistent focus on driving shareholder value. Some of the key focus areas for our capital include supporting growth across our core businesses, investing in strategic initiatives such as Oaktree and the continued scaling of Wealth Solutions, as well as targeted investments of our capital into smaller opportunities where we believe having exposure can provide knowledge and benefits to the franchise over time. We also retain ample liquidity to defend against downside risks and maintain flexibility. And lastly, returning capital to shareholders, primarily through opportunistic share repurchases. To that end, capital allocation should contribute meaningfully to our growth in distributable earnings per share, adding $1.10 per share of earnings over 5 years, increasing distributable earnings to $6.95 per share by 2030. Now, with the foundations in place, we are positioned to drive meaningful growth. And the combination of BN and BWS will support our continued growth and our evolution. Combining BN and BWS marks the next evolution of Brookfield. 5 years ago, we established Brookfield Wealth Solutions with a clear objective: to build a world-class insurance business that protects policyholders, delivers attractive risk-adjusted returns, and leverages Brookfield's differentiated real asset investing capabilities. That strategy has worked extremely well for us. In just a few years, the business has grown to nearly $200 billion of assets, generating nearly $2 billion of annual earnings. However, as the business has scaled, it is now clear that to keep growing and to maximize our returns while maintaining a low-risk profile, a full combination is optimal. First, it positions Brookfield as a globally diversified, fully integrated insurance and investment organization under a single public company. This simplifies our corporate structure and allows shareholders to directly own the full value of BN and BWS through a single security. Second, the combination provides our insurance operations with direct access to the corporation's permanent capital base, an incremental $145 billion. This enables a more efficient capital structure, enhances flexibility, and provides significant capacity to support long-term growth, something very few insurance organizations globally have access to. Third, the new structure creates a path toward broader global index inclusion that is unavailable today. Over time, inclusion in broader indices would broaden our investor base, improve trading liquidity, and facilitate greater ownership of our shares by passive investment vehicles. And importantly, this transaction is expected to be tax efficient for most shareholders. Taken together, the combination of BN and BWS creates a simpler, more efficient, and more flexible structure that positions Brookfield exceptionally well to continue compounding value for shareholders over the long term. In summary, we are positioned for a transformational phase of growth. We have a leading position around the secular trends shaping the global economy, and those trends are fueling the growth in our business plan. We expect the trajectory of our earnings and the capital from realizations to generate substantial free cash flow over the next 5 years that can be reinvested to drive long-term value for shareholders. And lastly, the combination of BN and BWS will position Brookfield as a globally diversified, fully integrated insurance and investment organization, supporting continued growth and enhancing returns on equity. Thank you all for your time. That concludes our prepared remarks. If any questions have been submitted through our live webcast platform, we would be pleased to answer them now.
Mr. Chair, there are no questions to be addressed.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for taking the time to join us today. I hope that you found the meeting and management presentation informative. We appreciate your participation.